All right, so in the previous video, we talked about deploying Microsoft Team for small business, where you just simply create a team and bunch of channels and assign members to those channels or teams. But when it comes to enterprise, things get complicated. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to deploy Microsoft Team in an enterprise environment. We're going to talk about the architecture, the workload, the network planner, team advisor, life cycles, as well as adaptations. Now, team architecture is tightly integrated with Microsoft Office 365, and it uses many features to power chat, file sharing, telephony, video streaming, and much more. Workload, on the other hand, team has three different workloads that can be deployed independently of each other: chat, teams, and channels, meeting and conferences, as well as phone system and PSTN. So you have one workload which is your chat, teams, and channels. Second workload would be your meeting and conferences, and of course the last one called the phone system and the PSTN connectivity. Now, some company may just require a chat, teams, and channel for, let's say, a particular branch office, where they may have a meeting and conference requirement for, let's say, the head office, whereas they may need a phone system for throughout the organizations. Each workload has its own section, and which we will be discuss more details on their own dedicated chapters. Now, when you talk about enterprise, we're talking about companies with multiple locations. We're talking about companies that may have a branch office in Toronto, Las Vegas, Dubai, Thailand, all these places. How do you provision your Microsoft deployment for that? Well, this is where Microsoft provides something called a network planner. The planning for network is very important. A network planning for team is extremely important when you have a large number of users and a complex network, or both. Team will support voice calling and video conferencing, both of which will rely on real-time communications to provide the best experience. So therefore, your network must have a sufficient amount of bandwidth, capacity to accommodate number of concurrent video calls and audio calls. A network should be designed with as best network design guide that you can think of. Have a network hardware that can support real-time communication protocol to their best. And of course, allow the required network port to be opened through your corporate firewall or some sort of firewall devices that you might be running. To help you with network planning, Teams comes with something called a network planner, which I'll show you how to use to create for a company with 3 branch offices. A network planner will ask you questions about the number and the type of users that you have and how many sites your organization has, and of course the bandwidth capacity of those particular link. Using that information, network planner will create a report that shows you the bandwidth requirement for each activity along with your recommendations. Now, the Team Advisor is a solution within Microsoft Team that brings together the teams, channel, file sharing, and planner all together to create a deployment project for your organization. Team Advisor creates a project plan specific to a workload you select, such as chat, teams, channels, that include the recommendation tasks that you should perform during your deployment. It's like kind of a network, someone making the plan for you, that you need to do this with step one, this, and that. Each task contains instructions and suggestions and links to the relevant articles and design guide. You can easily assign those tasks to one or more individual and specify a start and end date for each task so that you can keep track of what's happening within your organizations. Then of course you have the life cycle and the governance planning. As you plan your team deployment, you need to consider the life cycle of your team, channels as well as files, so that in your organizations you can manage everything from one locations. You should also think about what type of information will be stored within your team. For example, if you are, let's say, Health Canada, where you may have a government regulation that suggests that you cannot store sensitive a health record of a customer on a cloud. So therefore, you may need to prevent, you may need to have a governance policy within your team so that the employee do not upload a patient's record on a cloud. Because everything you put on the team, like a documentations or pictures or attachment, it will be stored somewhere in Microsoft environment. So therefore, that type of governance policy can be an issue. Teams may be created for a specific project for a department, or they might be used for central resources. So let's say you are setting up a remote oil drilling somewhere in Nunavut territories in Canada. Well, you may have 25 people who are working on that project. So you decided that I want to create a team for that 25 projects so that they can communicate for that particular task. Each of these uses have a different requirements, of course. How long will the team remain active? What happens if the project finished? Does the teams remain active or do you delete them? Who should own and manage the team? Obviously, if you have a team of 25 or 100 people, you're not going to go back to every time you want to add someone, remove someone to your IT department. You may want to assign someone, let's say your team leader, to be the admin of that particular team so that he or she can manage or remove their necessary members. Certain compliance requirement has to be applied to some teams, or some may not have any compliance at all. For example, you may have a two team for a project that is done in Nunavut territories in Canada, which is remote locations where the only way you can reach there is by plane. So therefore, you may have a two separate team. One is maybe sensitive data. One may not be that sensitive. May just have simple policy. There should be a naming policy to help user identify the right team. I mean, if you create a team called XYZ, doesn't really say much. Or if you call a team called, I don't know, Eagle One, it doesn't really say much, right? But if you create a team called Voice Bootcamp, Nunavut Oil Drilling Project. It's a little bit too long, but you got the point. The idea is that naming policy will help people identify which team they need to join or request a joining in. Creating a policy and guideline are part of your initial deployment that will help you ensure that your users will find the necessary information. Just as importantly, however, the appropriate policy needs to be there to protect that information. So not only you need to have a proper procedure and policies, but you also need to make sure that there is a security policy involved that certain things cannot be done within that team, which will help you conform to regulatory requirement because every country that you may deploy these certain policy solutions may have a different requirement. Last but not the least, we're going to talk about the adaptations. To ensure that your organization and your users get the most out of your team, you need to have an adaptation program. An effective adaptation program can mobilize early adopters who can either articulate the benefit of the teams to their colleagues and to business and their group leaders, spark excitement in others who will see the team improve collaboration, make it easier to connect with each other. I mean, you gotta keep, let's face it, if you have 10 people joining in a team and they don't know how to use it, well, they're not gonna be very motivated to use it, right? Or they may not be able to use some of the features more efficiently. So ensuring that people get the most out of the team, you must have some sort of adaptation program to ensure that everybody who joins in, they understand how to use the program. That could be a simple video training, some could be a procedures, what to do, or maybe a how to do guide that will help them navigate through the team. You can create a report back to deployment team for both success and difficulty to use the team as well. Should be part of your adaptation process. Now, how do you prepare your organization for Microsoft Team? Well, first of all, you must have a Microsoft Office 365 and or Microsoft 365 account. Now, your network, your office network or remote office or your home office should have enough network bandwidth to be able to access Microsoft resources efficiently. That means proper bandwidth, low latency, pretty much almost zero packet loss. Well, 1% packet loss. Network optimization is a vital part of your deployment. So we're going to go through some of the requirement of what we need to look at in the network optimizations. Now, if you're a small business and you already have a rolled out to Microsoft Office 365 or Microsoft 365, then you need to make sure that your team runs appropriately by ensuring proper bandwidth, that people who are working from remote, they should have adequate bandwidth, as well as you must ensure that the firewall does not block any connection to those sites. You may also have experienced problem with static calls, cut out voices. So therefore, you want to keep your jitter and packet loss as low as possible. Now, the network planner, another thing that you really need to look at is if you are going to use your own custom domain, then you want to create an SRV record. Now, SRV record is something that part of DNS technical guys at the IT department will know what to do. Your domain should have a resource, a service called Federation TLS based on TCP pointing to this particular target, which is hosted by Microsoft. Now, if you don't have that, you may have problem connecting with your Microsoft team with your own domain account. Network Planner, which I talked about before, is a tool that is available for your team admin centers, and that can be found by going to Planning and the Network Planner menu. Now, in few steps, the Network Planner will help you determine your organization requirement for connecting Microsoft Team users across your organizations. Now, when you provide network details and how the team will be used, the network planner will calculate your network requirements such as the bandwidth, the jitter requirement, the packet loss, and all the stuff, and give you a report so that you can design your network according to that. Now, basically, network planners allows you to create a representation of your organization using sites or location and Microsoft recommendation for those locations. It does generate a report, calculated bandwidth requirement for your tenant use. Now, in order to access your network planner, you as a user must be either part of the global administrator, team administrator, or team communication administrator. One of those three privileges or role will give you access to the network planner. Now let's take a look at how we can use a network planner for a company, Voice Bootcamp, that has three different locations. You got the Toronto location, Las Vegas location, and the Dubai locations. In Toronto, we have 2,000 employees with 100 users using the calling plan. Local PSTN is available for direct routing. You have the Las Vegas office with 400 employees with 10 employees with the calling plan, but we'll use the Toronto office for their internet as well as PSTN calls. And then of course you have the Dubai office, which contains 250 employees, 50 calling plan, and has a local internet but no direct PSTN connectivity. How can we use team to achieve that particular task? So let's go log into our team environment. So when you are logged into your Microsoft Team Admin Center, you will go to, you'll go to right here called Planning, and you have the option, oops, my apology, Network Planner. So if I click on this Network Planner, it's going to give me basically right now it says you have 0 network plan. Well, yeah. So I'm going to add a new one. It's going to ask me for network plan name. So I'm going to call this Voice Bootcamp Network Planner plan, or whatever you want to call it. You can put a little description and you apply. So now I have my network plan. Now, of course, you also have something called persona. Persona is like, okay, how you want to group your employee. For example, you may have an executive team, you may have a management team, you may have employers only, you have a janitor team, you have a room for conference room, telephone, remote workers. Some employee will be temp workers. These are called persona. And of course, then you have your networks. If I click on this network, now I can create an add network site. So here is going to ask me the number of users. So obviously this site is going to be for the Toronto. So I'm going to call this Toronto site, and you can get, head office in Canada. How many users? 2000, and it says subnet. Okay. So now any subnet that you may want to define, um, I'm going to put a subnet for now. It's going to be 24. Now, express route, if you turn this express route, you can create a private connection between your Microsoft Office 365 data center and your private network. Express route connections do not go over public internet. So this is some sort of advanced network features. We currently don't have that set up. We'll talk about that later. And then is a connection to one. If your network is connected to your service provider that gives you the internet connections, then you turn this particular feature on. So obviously I'm connected to the network, and it's going to ask me, what is your capacity? So right now, based on my office in Toronto, I have about 1000 megabits per second, 1 gigabit connections. Audio queue size, I'm not going to provide any of this stuff right now. Internet link capacity, which is 1000, and it's going to ask you your PSTN egress. So I can either say VoIP only or local. So VoIP only basically indicates it will only there will be no PSTN connections. All PSTN will be uh, through your VoIP connections to maybe another location. So right now I'm going to select local, and it's going to say PSTN type. So either you have a direct connections or calling plan. Now direct connections probably meaning that some sort of local gateway that you might have. Whereas calling plan where you will get a calling plan from, let's say, Microsoft directly. So I'm going to choose the direct connections, and I'm going to save. So that is my first location. Now I'm going to create a second location. So let's call this Las Vegas. Oops. And I believe there was 400, and I'm going to choose a subnet. Should have choose a different subnet for the Toronto because of the number of users. It is connected to the WAN. Well, based on our requirement, I believe it was supposed to use the Toronto link to for internet. So I'm going to use that, and I'm going to put 512 megabit per second connections. Is going to use the Toronto office for VoIP and save. Now I'm going to modify the Toronto site a little bit. This will be 0.016. And last but not least, we're going to create one for our Dubai location. Leave us 200, and I can choose Class C address. It's connected to the WAN, 512 MB connections. Internet is going to be local. Internet capacity, 512 is going to, there's no, I believe it was just a voice call. All right, so now I'm going to go back to Las Vegas, going to check this. It is connected to WAN, but it is using the remote locations to, it's going to use the Toronto locations to route the call for all the internet and stuff like that. All right, so I got my 3 locations. Now I'm ready to generate a report. I can create a started report, and it's going to tell me that if I have any office personal meaning that in my Dubai locations, how many remote workers I have how many local, etc. I'm going to keep that as it is for now, and just going to generate a report. I got to define a report name, VBC network report. All right, it just gives me a projected impact of using Microsoft Team, what I need for audio, video calls, screen share, stuff like that. So this is something that you could then use to design your network. This is just a very basic example. This really doesn't do anything in terms of the configurations or whatnot. It just gives you a baseline so that you can decide you can fine tune it based on your requirements. You can say that I'm going to allocate 40% of my bandwidth. I can run the report. It will change the calculations based on that information. All right. So that is basically how you run your network planner within your Microsoft team. All right, next, so that's basically it for this particular video. We'll continue with our chapter one in terms of deployment of your Microsoft Team lifecycles into a next video. I wanted to keep the video as 20 minutes, not longer than that. So that's pretty much it, and I will see you in the next video.